Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Children's Scrutiny Panel. One membership of the committee. We've got apologies from Councillor Holroyd-Doveton. And if we just go around the room and just say who we are for those who may be unaware. My name is Cathal Burke and I'm chairing the panel meeting.
Councillor Sheikh Ullah.
Councillor Darren O'Donovan.
Councillor Donna Bellamy.
Dale O'Neill, Voluntary Co-op T.
Councillor Lisa Holmes.
Good morning, I'm Elaine McShane, Service Director, Family Support and Child Protection.
Good morning, I'm Joanne Sanders, I'm Service Director for Learning and Early Support.
I'm Sheila Locke and I am the Independent Chair of the Safeguarding Board for Kirklees.
Thank you and welcome. Item 2 is minutes of the previous meeting. Can members approve the minutes as an accurate account? Yeah, thank you. Item 3, interest. If any councillors have any interest to declare, if you can fill out the appropriate paperwork and hand it in at the end of the meeting, please. Item 4, admission of the public. Everything on the agenda is to be taken in public, and we have an informal agenda which will be taken afterwards. Item 5 is the draft Kirklees Safeguarding Children Board Annual Report. This is for members of the panel to consider the draft Kirklees Safeguarding Children Board Annual Report for 2017-2018, and Sheila Locke, the Independent Chair of the Kirklees Safeguarding Children Board, will present this item.
Okay, firstly, thank you very much, members, for inviting me to come along today. I am Sheila Locke. I'm the Independent Chair of the Safeguarding Board for Kirklees. So I have no affiliations to any of the agencies who are represented on the board. My job is really to bring the partnership together and to ensure that the safeguarding activities meet the standards that we would want to see for children across the borough. The purpose of this report is to provide assurance about how the system locally is working, and I think it's important to recognise that this report, because they run retrospectively, takes us up to the period of March this year. So it doesn't deal, per se, with events that are current and live. As I say, the report's purpose is to provide assurance about how the system is working. And members may be aware that I came last year and said that it was very difficult to provide assurance because the quality of the information that we had wasn't as robust as we would like to have seen. And I'm pleased to be able to come along this year and say that I feel much more assured that the safeguarding system in Kirklees is currently working well. And in part, that's because of the efforts of the senior staff, particularly in social care, but also because of the efforts of senior partners across the agencies in Kirklees. You will see in the report we've done a lot of focus work over the last year, very much aligned to the improvement plan. I think that the report has a focus very much on the work in children's social care, in part because this report's purpose is to give assurance. Going forward, I would very much like to see a much greater emphasis on partnership and what the partners are doing. And I think particularly some of the work around early support will really help us to drill down into the contribution that partners, particularly schools, can make to supporting children and their families earlier. If I just draw your attention perhaps to the conclusion, which highlights the fact that we can be assured about safeguarding activity, but also highlights some of the areas that we want to develop further over the course of the next year. So particularly work around early support, because that's really critical in helping us to support families earlier, to delay the onset of difficulties, but also work around CSE, around domestic abuse, and work to further embed the voice of children and young people. And as I say, what I would like to focus on over the next year as a partnership is really getting that robust way of working as a system to enable us to make sure that we keep children safe. I didn't intend to go through the report in detail, but I am happy to take any questions that members might have.
Thank you for that, Sheila. It's just on page 10 where we go through the snapshot statistics. If I'm looking at the training and workforce, so the first one is 25 CSE courses delivered to 448 delegates. In total, how many delegates were there or have signed up to receive that training? Because the second line then goes on to say 975 delegates benefit from online CSE training. So is the totality 975?
The totality is actually 975 plus the 448. It's probably important just to make the point that we have an extensive and varied workforce. You will know from your own experience, people access training differently. Some people come and they access training face-to-face. Other people access training online because it's easier given their work commitments. So we try to offer as much of a varied kind of curriculum as we possibly can, because that way we can get more people to do it. I suppose, if I may, the next question arising from that is, do we think that's enough? And I suppose my response to that would be that the world of safeguarding, the world of kind of, you know, vulnerability, it's changing all the time. So we're constantly having to adapt and change the offer that we make. I think, based on what's happening in other places, that's probably about, you know, what's fair in terms of a benchmark. But thanks to the work of the Learning and Development subgroup of the board, which Joanne actually chairs, we have got a training strategy. And I think that training strategy going forward will help us to make sure that we're able to reach a lot more people in their organisations, but also through the training that we offer as a board.
Thank you for that. I think you know, the final bit that you raised on that you are going to reach out to more, I think that's going to be really key. So if that were one of the things that I could feed back, that would be really good. But I've just got one more comment. It's on page 15 of the report. So the next generation, a local picture. So for children on page 15, one of the bullet points says 28% said that they had lost sleep at least once a week over worries. Compared to a national figure or a national average, is that hit the target, yeah, or is it worrying?
So it's probably important to say that I chair another board, and I'm involved in some of the national arrangements for safeguarding boards to come together, and we do talk about these kinds of issues. That data actually comes from the reports that we do around health and well-being, the surveys that we do of young people. I think there's no doubt that young people are under a lot more pressure these days, all sorts of pressure, social media, school, exams, you know, access to information is very different from my generation, and, you know, that's the worry. I don't think that figure is out of kilter with what is happening nationally. In fact, it's better than in some areas. So if I compare that figure to the London Borough, where I also chair a board, I know that that figure of children reporting that they're losing sleep is somewhere in the 30%. So I think, you know, you could take that survey next week and it would be 10%, because I think it very much depends on what's going on for that child at that point in time. But I don't think it's a figure that puts us out of kilter with what's happening elsewhere.
Yeah, I think to compare it on the London footprint, Kirklees, I don't think personally that would be the right way of comparing it. But I was just wondering, is there any sort of work in place to try and reduce that figure? Because, you know, 28%, I don't know if it's just me, but it just seems a little higher. I don't know.
Okay, so perhaps it's just important to. I recognise what you're saying about the comparison in relation to a London borough, but I think from some of my national work, I would also know that if you looked at a metropolitan borough, I don't think that the figure here is out of kilter with that. I think children's emotional health and well-being and the kind of issues that lead to sleep loss, for example, I think there's a very good response to that here in Kirklees. I think some of the work that's been done to remodel the 0 to 19 service, I think some of the work around the Thrive model, and particularly some of the work around dealing with children's issues around how happy they are and how well they feel early, is really good. And I think that's based on getting in there early. So I think there's some really good initiatives in schools. I think there's some really good initiatives in the community and the voluntary sector that are working with young people. So, and I think if those problems exacerbate, I think the network of referring children and young people into the CAMS service is looking much better than it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So I think there is assurance that young people are getting help and support, and that the systems are there to provide that support adequately. It might just be important to know that the board commissioned an in-depth study of CAMS services and looked at some of the issues that were around in terms of emotional well-being and health. And it's positive to note that the satisfaction rates for some of that work have improved quite significantly. So I think we can be reassured that there is the right support in place.
Okay, just before I bring in Councillor Holmes as indicated and the other members, I'd just like to ask on the executive summary, and the final point, it says to develop the understanding of CSE and missing and worked with care providers. Could you elaborate a little further on the understanding of CSE and also what work is currently taking place and will be taking place going forward?
Happy to do that. The point in the report is that a year ago when I came here to Scrutiny, we were very concerned about the number of missing episodes across the borough. It's probably important to say that many of the children that were going missing were not Kirklees children. They were children placed in Kirklees by other authorities. But we wanted to really get a grip on that. So some of the work that's alluded to in the report is the work that we've done with providers across the borough to actually get an understanding of the kind of expectations that we have in relation to the care that they provide for children and young people placed in the borough. So that's the work with providers. In that work, we've been very clear that there is a link between children who go missing and vulnerability. And children who are vulnerable, we know, are the kind of children who can be exposed to other threats, such as CSE. So we've been very keen to make sure that there is a broad understanding of vulnerability, at a level across providers in the borough. I think some of the work that is currently happening is about making sure that we focus on vulnerability in its widest sense, that we don't just think about the risk in relation to things like CSE, but we think about other issues like homelessness, about drugs, about alcohol, about gang-related activity that, is increasingly a factor, and that we try and think about risk and vulnerability in its broadest sense. So there's a lot of work going on to develop our risk and vulnerability strategy. But also, I think, in the report, we do make reference to the fact that we, at the time of the period of this report, of investigations that were currently ongoing. And obviously, there is no room for complacency here in Kirklees. We want to be confident that our strategy for picking up CSE is as robust as it can possibly be. So, as a board, we have commissioned a kind of two-prongs approach to that. The first is to look at the current practice and our strategy and our work and make sure that that is absolutely fit for purpose. And to do that work with us, we've engaged the National Working Group on CSE and the University of Bedfordshire, who are doing a lot of the national best practice work. So at the end of that process, we will be confident, I think, that our strategy sits amongst the best nationally in terms of what's happening. But we also want to see whether there is anything that we can learn from the cases that have recently been in the media, and hence, you know, we've commissioned an external look at some of those cases. What will happen is that those two pieces of work will coalesce. We will bring them together so that we can say, okay, that historic stuff happened between 2004 and 2011. What do we know? Could we have done things better based on what was around at the time? How will that inform our current work? But we'll also have the benefit of the most up-to-date research bringing that together. We're hoping that those two bits of work will culminate in a report towards the end of March. And I was actually going to suggest that at that point I might come back here and actually engage in a bit of a conversation with members about what that's told us about CSE and how that will influence the board's work going forward.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. I think the panel would appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
Okay, there are three things I want to talk to you about and ask your opinion on really. You said you value the work with partners. I'm on the West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Authority, so I know quite a lot of the work that they're now doing in the community in West Yorkshire, not just in Kirklees. And part of that is that they are looking at trying to get people to stop smoking, because a lot of fires are through smoking-related accidents. And they're also looking at vulnerability in the community, and they've moved away now from doing just home safety checks en masse, and they're now more targeted. So looking at more vulnerable people in the community have been identified, and they're obviously using other data to identify people who may be vulnerable, and they're doing their home safety checks. Within those, they do look at other risks, so not just fire. So they're doing an awful lot of work in Kirklees and other authorities already. So I wondered what the link between KSCB was and the fire service and how that's being utilised. They're also doing some work in Wetherby at the young offenders, because they were experiencing a lot of call-outs to fires. The young offenders there were very ingenious and creating fires out of yoghurt pop-tops and all sorts of different things. So they're now doing a lot of work in Wetherby. And they've got a programme going there. So again, that's something I think that the KSCB should be talking to the fire service about. And I didn't really get that feeling from the report about the fire service. The second one is on page 15, and I am sure everybody was horrified to hear how young our young girls are, or probably boys as well, are having sexual intercourse. And it's not just the risk, obviously, of disease and pregnancy, it's the emotional impact of that as well, which is very likely life-changing. To start having sexual intercourse at such a young age is I doubt that anybody would be totally unaffected by that. And of course that's got a long-term impact. And the other thing is we have, and I've raised it in here before, we've talked a lot about the schools can do this and the schools can do that, and the schools are the best place to do this. And I am continuing to be worried about the impact this is having on our educators in Kirklees. I know they're incredibly good. We have some amazing senior leadership teams in our schools. I visited a school a couple of weeks ago. It wasn't anything particularly connected with Kirklees. I just happened to be out with somebody else. And I left feeling the staff there were broken. It's a school that has got problems. But it worries me now that how many of our teachers are having, feeling a responsibility for a lot of other things other than educating. And I know we've got safeguarding in schools, and I understand all that. I'm worried about how this is going to play out in the next few years, because we know that we've got increased demand in lots of different areas. CSE is, as everybody talks about CSE, a massive concern. But also then we've got the pregnancy thing, and we've got children with emotional difficulties, families who are struggling, kids who are in care. And I worry about the resilience of our teaching staff to take all that on and to carry on taking on increased demand for that as well in future years.
try and deal with those in the order. So first of all, a bit of reassurance. The Fire and Rescue Service is involved with the board. They attend the main board and are involved in some of those partnership discussions. Have we utilised them as much as we could? Probably not. And I would say that part of the reason for that is, if you remember where we were last year when we had this annual conversation about the report, we were very concerned about getting the assurance right that actually children were safe and that they were appropriately protected. So I think the role of partners, and I kind of alluded to it in the introduction, I think the role of partners over the next year has to develop further, and I think we have to really provide some challenge to partners about the contribution that they're able to make, and challenge to other partners about how we use that expertise that they bring. I'm aware of some of the work that is happening nationally with the fire service. They do a great job around issues like hoarding and neglect. They do work around young offenders and prevention, particularly around arson prevention, as you would expect. So I do think that there is more that we can utilise. And by way of assurance, I'd just say that over the next year, I'm hoping that the report next year will have a different feel, because you will certainly, hopefully, see that greater contribution from wider partners. I think the issues around young people and the age at which they start to have sex, I suppose my reassurance would be that there is a very close link between the work of the Safeguarding Board, which is dealing with safe raising of the kinds of issues that we debate. How do we make sure that our young people are adequately equipped for life, that those decisions that are more than just having sex but are emotional as well, how do we make sure that we build in to the services that are offered the kind of resilience building that young people need to make informed choices and informed decisions. So there is that very, very close working relationship. And the public health data around the age at which children and young people begin to have sexual relationships is not different here to other places. But that does not mean that we should be complacent in doing something. So the public health work is very much helping us to do that. I have to say that the board's relationship with schools is great. We have really good, strong representation from both, from all three sectors, primary, secondary and special schools. I think that schools recognise that for readiness to learn, that the factors that children experience at home and in their community impact on their readiness to learn. So schools are very willing partners in the discussions that we're having around how best can we provide a community offer that supports children and their families effectively so that children arrive in school and are ready to learn. The barrier to that is, of course, resources. At a time when all agencies are stretched in terms of capacity and financial resources, it's a challenge. So, the fact is that we can do more by collaborating and working together. And I think the model of developing schools isn't just about what more can schools do. It's about how can we reconfigure and change services to sit around schools to provide a better sense of support to those schools, and in turn a better sense of support to children and their families. Those conversations are happening all the time, and I think it's really interesting for me, because I think in those schools that have managed to work and get that right, they are the very champions and advocates of us doing more and challenging the way in which we organise services around school. So I feel very optimistic that over the course of the next year, we will have a network, a community network across Kirklees, centred around some of those schools as hubs in their community, with services from different agencies, not just the council, configured to support schools and support staff in a way that helps us to get it right for children. Because if we just left schools to it, you're absolutely right. Many would struggle because of the resourcing issues.
I'll just pick up on the partners side of it. Reading the report, I'm not getting the feel of it. And I appreciate it's a draft report, so there is some scope to make some changes. I think that the problem I had was I wasn't getting the feeling of the future as much as I would have expected to. And I know it's a report on what's happened, what is happening, but I think it's really important that we have a focus on the future a little bit more in here. Particularly, I picked up the partners thing, because like we agree on that we need to probably utilise the partners a little bit more in probably a different way as well in some instances. And like I say, I do have a lot of experience with the fire services. I know some of my colleagues do. And I think we probably could be missing a trick there. So it's really reassuring to know that you are looking at that in the future. I would like to feel that more in the report if there's any opportunity to change that, because I think that's a really good focus for us to have.
It might just be important just to say that the reason the report is draft is because of the timing of this scrutiny with the timing of the board meeting that signs it off. But when this does go to the board, it will have an appendix to it, which is a commitment statement from each partner, and the fire service is one of those services. I think I would just remind you of what I said right at the beginning about the purpose of this report. It isn't a business plan that looks into the future. It's a statement about this is where we are now. It's an assurance statement. So, the business plan that accompanies this will probably give exactly that sense of future that you're looking for. So I'm just sat here thinking perhaps it would be helpful as a board for us to commit to send that business plan so that you can have a look at it, because I think that will provide you the level of reassurance about the future and what it is you want to see.
Thank you. If you could send that, that would be appreciated. Dale next, please, and then Councillor Bellamy.
You were talking about vulnerability, and the statistic that worried me was that 1 in 12 children are carers. I would regard those young people as being extremely vulnerable. I wondered how much contact do our services have with child carers?
I think the issue around young carers is something that's received a lot of attention nationally. It is a very worrying statistic, and it is concerning, not least of all because those children are often socially isolated and, as you say, vulnerable. There is work that looks at the strategy to support young carers, to make sure that they are, first, that we know who they are, and that secondly, that there are a range of support services in place. And I suspect that that is something that would come through this scrutiny committee in terms of the work that happens with young carers. But I think we can be confident that there is a strategy. I don't know whether Elaine wants to say anything more, but there is definitely a strategy that actually supports those young carers actively.
I would like to hear about that, please.
So in terms of any young carers, one may become aware of them and will undertake an assessment, first and foremost of their needs, but then the broader family needs. And in some circumstances, it may be that we're in touch with adult services to ensure... Oh, sorry. And I'm talking quietly. I do apologise. I'm a bit hoarse. So there's two things. Our focus is on the child and their needs, and making sure their needs are met. But often what we do is we'll have contact with adult services as well to ensure that an adult assessment has been undertaken in terms of the parents, so that if there's any external support they can receive, that's put into place to reduce the impact on the child. Because our key thing is ensuring that children's welfare, they're safeguarded, that actually the caring role doesn't impact on their ability to attend school and achieve. So there are no range of things that take place to ensure first and foremost the child is safeguarded.
Thank you. One of the first things I sort of noticed was on, and I've got to find it now. I've lost it again. Where is it? On page 14, it says 2 in 5 children experience family breakdown. Is that sort of the same in every other area? I just wondered if that was, you know, just the Kirklees average, or is that sort of same across the board? The other thing was page 15, where it says 45% of children and young people reported that their school had dealt with bullying well, but then on page 25 it says that 100% of schools are reported to meet the following requirements, and procedures are in place to prevent and respond to bullying to children. And I just wondered then, if how's that message from schools then, if they've got all the procedures in place, how's that message getting across then to children if only 45% feel that their school has been dealt with it correctly? And the other thing was page 29 of the report, which is to do with fostering and missing, where it says a resource pack has been developed offering advice and guidance and key contact points for all providers, which I presumed was foster providers. And I just wondered, is that the draft pack that had come to Corporate Parenting Board? And if it is, it would perhaps help if that did actually come to scrutiny, because it was a draft and some of the wording I actually found quite questionable, and I did ask if we could see another version of it just before, because there was some of the wording I weren't quite happy with in it.
Okay, I'll try and deal with them in the order in which you said them. So the first about family breakdown. I think the figure is a national figure. It just represents the fact that actually children live in very different circumstances these days. Lots of children you're dealing with kind of very different kinds of families, and there's no doubt that for many children that can be traumatic. For many children it can be a positive experience. So you're having to try and deal with those, you know, that spectrum really. The second point you made about bullying, I think there is a really stark difference between having a policy and procedure in place and the way you implement that. So I think the disparity that you're referring to about, you know, children who perhaps feel their school dealt with something well, as opposed to those who feel they didn't deal with it well, is about their lived experience of what it was like going through that procedure. My experience from discussions with schools around these kinds of issues is that they're very live to the fact that bullying can be a problem. It is a challenge because you will all know that social media is constantly changing, and patterns of bullying are constantly changing, and keeping up to date with some of that is really hard. So, you know, I guess what I would say is it's something that we're constantly refreshing and thinking about, because actually, you know, if a child is bullied, for them and their family, that's a traumatic experience, and we want to make sure it's dealt with well. But I know that that's something that's very live for schools, and they're constantly trying to address that. The issue around the providers pack, it's not the fostering pack that I was referring to, it's the pack that we did for providers of care in the independent sector here in Kirklees. And we did that because we were concerned about the extent of missing and wanted to make sure that those providers were absolutely clear about what our expectations were locally about how they reported that. But I have absolutely no problem if you're going to have the pack back for fostering, that the KSCB pack for external providers comes back to you at the same time, and I'll happily work with Elaine on doing that so that you can see the range of picture. And what I would say is I think it's really good practice. I think we should recognise that actually it's something we've done really well to make sure that external providers here know what we expect of them. And sorry, I can't remember the last point. That was it? Yeah.
Any further questions or comments, Councillor Bellamy? No. Councillor O'Donovan, please.
Just a couple of comments before I list out my questions. We'll do it that way like the others have done. So, what we hope is going to be useful in Dewsbury West in my ward is we've just written letters to carers. We worked with council support to identify, with all the right GDPR regulations, the carers in our ward, and we wrote them a letter. And we wrote them a letter just so we could make a connection with carers about the fact that we were the councillors and that we were here to support them with whatever they needed. It also was a letter that included some contact details should they ever need them. And we wanted to do that because we thought it was important for us as councillors to make that connection with carers in our ward, because we don't always know who they are, and we hope that that proves to be successful for some. I wasn't going to ask about schools, but because schools came up, I think me and Joanne have talked about this previously. It's something that's close to my heart because my two kids are at primary school, and because of the curriculum changes over the last few years, you've now got kids in reception class doing work that in previous years would be year 1 and in some cases year 2 stuff. So you're asking parents, and we can cope reasonably well, but you're asking parents, or the government, I suppose, with changes in curriculum, are asking parents to get their kids to do work that in many cases they're just not capable of doing. And families just aren't capable of supporting their children to do this work. Because kids haven't really changed, and babies haven't changed, and development hasn't really changed. Yet we're expecting a lot more of our 4- and 5-year-olds at school as opposed to a few years ago. And that really worries me, and I hope that government recognise that and decide that the science, the maths, the English and the reading and the writing shouldn't be superseded by kids' emotional development and their right just to play and experience being with each other. And that is something that I really hope government become to latch onto and almost reverse what they've done in schools, because the pressure that has put onto parents, these vulnerable families, these families in need, these families in poverty, if you think about the pressure it puts on me and my wife, which is minuscule in comparison, the pressure on those families is going to be huge, and I think that will create, unfortunately, more safeguarding issues going forwards as parents just can't cope with what's happening at schools and what's been expected of their children. However, the 3 questions I had were, I wasn't on the panel last year, so can you identify any trends in the figures on page 10 that might show an upward trend from last year or previous years? The document talks about population rise. We know that in certain pockets of demographics in Kirklees, we've got a rise in poverty and deprivation. There was an article in The Independent recently that talks about a national increase in teenage suicide rates and bullying rates. So for those reasons, do we expect the work of the Safeguarding Board and Safeguarding Partners to increase over the next few years? And then the third question would be, with the figures on page 10 still alarmingly high, even though I understand that we do the best that we can with the resources that we've got, how do we do more?
Thank you for that. I think the first thing to say is I think I'm really delighted that we've got some really good practice in terms of making sure that young carers know who to contact. I think that's really good, and I think we should just acknowledge that, really. That sounds like something that's positive. I'd be interested in talking to you about how we might spread some of that, if that's appropriate. I think the second area that you raised around curriculum, you wouldn't expect me to comment on the politics of the curriculum, but what I will say is that it's hard being a parent, and I think it's a real challenge for some parents to be able to support their children effectively. Every parent wants their best for their children, I'm convinced of that, but when those demands are increasing, that gets tough, which is why I'm so pleased that what the Leeds Partnership has brought to Kirklees is an approach that is much more restorative in working with parents. It does see the strengths that parents bring to parenting their children, and I think if we can over the next year embed some of the early support work around schools and work with schools more effectively, we can find ways in which we can not only make life better for children, but also hopefully make life better for parents by offering support with some of those areas where they're finding perhaps most challenging, which is important. So, going away from seeing the negatives in parenting to thinking about the strengths that people bring and building on those strengths has got to be a good thing for children across the borough. In terms of the trends, I think what's reassuring from last year, where we had very poor performance data, is that actually we now have very robust performance data. We can still do more to get that more accurate, but actually we now have data on which we can evidentially decide what we're going to do, and that's really critical. We know there are trends around reducing numbers of children who are subject to child protection. We know that we are seeing reductions in relation to children who become looked after, and we know that there are reductions in relation to children who are subject to other statutory interventions such as children in need. I think if I think about the future and going forward, I think getting an evidential base to early support will be really critical, because I guess my challenge as the independent chair is to say, okay, if we're not working with children who are subject to child protection or children in need, how can we be confident that those children are getting a service? So the work that the board is doing with Joanne's team and with schools to get a framework to measure support to families is going to be really critical to help us evidence that that reduction is safe and you know, is working well. I was really interested in yesterday the Association of Directors of Children's Services published a report around pressures in the system, and you know what they're reporting is that nationally the impact of things like poverty, reducing resources, is impacting on safeguarding across the whole of the local authority estate nationally. So you know, reductions in children in need and child protection is great, but I think we also need to be realistic that there is a saturation point, and I think what we need to do is make sure over the next year that some of those pressures that are around and some of those reductions that we're managing to secure are safe, and you know, getting the early support stuff will be absolutely critical to that. So I guess in response to your question, how can we do more? The challenge for me is if we don't have to work with children and families in a statutorily, you know, kind of confined way, how are we going to work with families? How are we going to measure that? And how are we going to know that it's really making a difference to the kinds of problems that children and families locally are experiencing? And I think that work around early support will be critical. I'd like to come back next year and be able to say to you, you know, this early support work around communities, around schools, this is what parents are saying about it. This is what the experience of children is in terms of outcomes and impact. And yes, we've managed to move cases from up there in the system to much more effective community interventions, and we know it works. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah. Sorry to be overtly political. I wish the government would give us more money. I really do, because and it'd be similar in other local authorities when you look at figures like this, but it pains my heart, it really does, to see these figures, and it's through no one's fault in this room, and it's through no one's fault in this chamber, but I would imagine that these figures have been relatively similar for years, yet we still struggle financially to do all the things that we really, really should be doing. You know, we can get potholes filled in, and we can keep libraries open, and we can cut grass, and we can repair parks, but the government should be stepping up and giving us a bit more. If they want to increase our statutory responsibility, great, that'd be fantastic. If that's a way to get some more money, that'd be great. If not, just give us, I think we should just have more money to do more for these children and families, I really do. Thanks, Chair.
Now, you wouldn't expect me to respond politically to that comment. I mean, I think that it's important just to say that actually our figures in terms of statutory intervention show some reductions. That's good, you know, because it does illustrate that some of the work that the partnership with Leeds has brought to Kirklees is really helping us to think differently about the work with families. I think in the absence of more money, I think the challenge for us is to make sure we're making most effective use of the resources we've got. And I think to go back to the earlier question about how can we work effectively with schools, the answer is not to expect schools to do more, but it's about getting other agencies to work differently with schools as the hub at the centre. But yes, it's a challenge.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from panel members? Okay. If not, thank you very much for attending. Thank you for the report. It was very in-depth in answering the questions today, and we look forward to having you back again very soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 6. This is Children's Services 10-point improvement plan. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the progress towards delivering the actions and improvements to Kirklees children's social care set out in the 10-point improvement plan, and to provide the panel with a refreshed plan for information. Elaine, are you taking this? Thank you.
I am Chair, thank you. I'll try to be clear, so if I'm not, please let me know. So yes, as members know, the purpose of the 10-point plan is to improve children's social care and safeguarding systems in Kirklees, and that was to ensure that vulnerable children and young people get the best start in life and are safe and protected from harm. That's the key focus of the plan. Because actually the Leeds Kirklees partnership has been in place for 12 months, we took the opportunity to revisit the plan and look at the work that we've done so far to make sure that we're really focusing on the right areas. And so the plan has been refreshed, and actually what we've done is so to make sure that we've got the right focus, but we're confident that we're doing the right things for the children at the right time. I think what's critical to this plan, and it sort of refers back to what Sheila was saying, is the work of partners in terms of supporting families is key to the work that we do, and sort of working really closely together. So I would say, and I think the last Ofsted monitoring letter stated this as well, that children's social care services continues to improve. I think we are, at the time now, seeing a pace of change, and that's based on the strength of the leadership team that are in place. And actually, I think the stability of the workforce is key, because we're now in a position where right through the management structure we have permanent posts. Within our children's social work teams we only have 6 vacancies. We've actually gone from having 70 agency staff across children's social work services down to 14. So that is demonstrating the stability of the workforce. And I think really what we have done and put a lot of effort in is to work with our partners to really strengthen our relationships, so that we are working more closely together, because I don't think that was something that was seen previously, so that's really important. I think we've worked with members as well to try and be open and transparent around the work that we're doing, so that actually it's really helpful coming to Scrutiny to get that challenge, because it does enable us to go back and revisit what we're doing to make sure we're doing the right things. So, and people will may be aware that as a result of the progress made, it's now the Secretary of State agreed that we could appoint a new Director of Children's Services, and that has been completed, and the new DCS, Mel Meggs, will join us on the 3rd of December, which is interesting because on the 4th we'll have a monitoring visit with Ofsted, so it's a good time to start, and I'll have a friend. It's always helpful. I might be able to hide behind my bookshelf. I don't think so. So the strategy for improvement, though, in the plan remains the same, and that is really to create the conditions for success, and that we've got that foundation of good practice, and that really goes towards better outcomes for children, because that's really our focus. I mean, the strategy is working. As I've talked about, we have now got a stable social work workforce. Families, schools are reporting, for example, that they're seeing the same social worker. They're getting familiar with social workers so they can have good quality conversations. It's not a different person on a different day. And because we've now moved into communities, So we were previously based centrally, we now moved out into communities, so we're building those broader relationships, which is really positive. Our referral rates have fallen, and that's appropriate, that's safe, because the key thing is about understanding our families and making sure that we don't intervene inappropriately, because that's very intrusive for families. And I think we were having a conversation, we had our Celebrating Social Work conference yesterday, and one of the things we were talking about is the impact of poverty on families. And what we need to do in our assessments is really take into account the lived experience of the family in terms of that, in terms of how they're managing that, and so to not penalise them inappropriately for the things that they're trying to balance, and making sure that they have the right support, and it's not necessarily a social work intervention. If that's what it needs to be, that's what it would be. So I think the investment into the early help partnership is a really key aspect for us, and I've been working closely with Joe and other partners to look at how that develops. And I think you're right in terms of the impact on schools, because we've had lots of conversations with schools about their role. The key for schools is that they see children on a day-to-day basis. The key for us is how we wrap the services around schools so that they feel confident those children are supported at whatever level they are. So I think that's important. I would say that despite the progress made, and I have to say this, I say this on a daily basis, and we have got capacity to move forward really well, but there's still a lot of things for us to do. It'd be remiss of me to say that we haven't lots of things to do, because I see us moving forward as an authority to good and outstanding in terms of an Ofsted outcome. So the work that we need to do to achieve that is quite a lot, really. But we've got all our systems in place, improved quality assurance systems. One of the things that we're working really well at as well is actually getting the voice of the child. So what is their lived experience, what are they saying about not only what it's like living in their family, but what is it like when we intervene, and is that of a benefit? And what we want to do is take that to families as well, because really what we want to move towards is rather than families see us as someone that actually is going to have a negative impact, so to taking the approach that we're taking using restorative practice, that we work with families and they see that our role aim is to actually support them to get to a place where they can manage effectively without us being involved. I think the main concern which has been shared with Ofsted previously is the quality and timeliness of recording, assessment and planning, and that's come out in the monitoring letters. So what they've said times many is actually social workers know their family, they know the children, they know them well, but actually they don't necessarily record that as well. And the assessments don't always demonstrate that. So we have had a training programme specifically put in place to look at that. And in our appraisal process, all our social workers have an appraisal point around assessment, coding and planning. So we have that as a wrap, so that everybody knows that that's what we're working towards consistently. So I think just some of the wider areas of improvement include continuing to reduce caseloads overall. I would say that our caseloads on average are around 15.9, so almost 16 per social worker. But within that, there are a small number, probably half a dozen social workers in our assessment and intervention teams that have an higher number. But I monitor that on a weekly basis, and we've now got a system in place where any social worker with cases over 22, I have a report to say why that's the case and what action is going to be taken to reduce that. I think as well, continue to improve support for our care leavers, and that's really to raise the proportion in education, employment and training. I think we've made some really good progress around how we look at the accommodation that they're placed in leaving care. We're seeing some positive for that, but then their broader aspects in terms of education and training is something that we really want to work on. So really that's a summary of that. Members have the report and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the report. It's encouraging to see the progress that's been made towards delivering the actions and improvements that are required, and also the referral rates to see that they have fallen somewhat, and also I think importantly is the workforce stability and the culture that is created from having a dedicated workforce. If I can just comment on the social workers, that you mentioned caseloads, which I think you said the average is around 15.9. What is concerning is the number that still exist who have caseloads perhaps over 20. I'm wondering why that's still the case and what can be done to reduce that in a timely manner so that it relieves pressure on social workers. Is it a workforce issue, or is there specific circumstances around those which mean that they are such for the time being? And then just going forward, you mentioned some of the challenges, but what would be the biggest challenge that would prevent us from making further progress?
Okay, in terms of caseloads, so I look at caseloads on a regular basis, and in our, predominantly the higher caseloads are in our assessment and intervention teams. And in an assessment and intervention team, social workers do a variety of work. So they'll do assessments, they'll have child in need cases, child protection cases, and care proceedings. So an whole range of work. So when I look at a number, so so if they've got a caseload of 30, what I need to understand is what does that caseload look like? And sometimes that might be that they've been on duty for the previous week and they've picked up a lot of assessments. So what we'll know, if you're doing a 10-day assessment, in a week or so, that caseload will reduce because they're quite fluid in that part of the service, and that's where our issue is. One of the things that we've done as well is, and where we've seen some of this around the caseloads is, so we moved our social work teams out geographically on the data that we had based around the geographical area as it was set. And what we've begun to look at is the referral rates and actually how they differ in different parts of the three areas. So in particular, Huddersfield centrally, where one of our teams sits, a really high number of caseloads, where we've got another team in another area, group of teams in another area where their caseloads are lower. So what we've looked at is it's very detailed, but the postcodes around that area, and worked out if we're moving a postcode to the other teams, that will even out the caseloads, the referral rates. So it's that detail of unpicking what the caseloads look like, where the referrals are coming from, and how you can match that against teams. And I think the other thing that we've had is as well an higher number of newly qualified workers. So they're protected for the first 12 months. Their caseload is protected at 15. Once they move beyond that is then you can move between 15 and 20. And the nature of the work that they undertake is also protected. So during the first 6 to 8 months, you wouldn't expect them to have child protection, care proceedings. They might be working alongside other people, but you wouldn't expect them to have that in their own right. So that then limits in some of the teams where you've got a team of 7, you might have 3 newly qualified workers, that it limits how you can allocate some of that work out. So what we're starting to do is look at how that is, and what we can do is actually with the person that's got the higher caseload have a secondary worker that does some of the work alongside them. So a newly qualified worker can't own the case in their own right, but as part of their learning they can support some of that work, so it reduces the impact. I think in the next month or so we'll see that those averages sort of more equal across the workforce. I think the higher levels are just a very small number, and with this work that we're doing it will reduce it. Shall I answer the question, or do you want me to go on to the next point first, Chair? Because then you've got a question. Yeah, and what we've developed is we call it a Doing the Simple Things Well report, and this comes on to one of the next questions is what is our biggest challenge going forward in terms of achieving good and outstanding. One of our biggest challenges is making sure that actually our data, so the numbers, match the quality of what we're doing. So we have, Ofsted actually, we have what they call an Annex A, and Ofsted have all aspects of the work that we've done is actually fed into an electronic system, and that data is presented to Annex A. And what you want in that, so it might be about visits to a child, initial child protection case, conferences within 15 days, visits to child within timescales, reviews in timescales, and what we need to demonstrate through that data is as close to 100% as you possibly can, because that's what Ofsted will be looking at. And I think one of our biggest challenges at the moment is making sure that the quality of the work that we're doing with families is actually put into the electronic system, like feeding the bees, so that that comes out and demonstrates in the data that we have.
Yeah, firstly, I think all the staff have done really, really well. And I think one of the successes, as soon as the improvement journey started, was the issues that were identified. Measures were put in so quickly to try and rectify them, whether that be the referrals or the number of cases. I mean, I think the number of cases I heard when this first started was over 25 per social worker, and we're down to like 15 or 16. And yes, there's going to be complex cases, and I think that you should be really proud of the work that's gone into that. And yeah, so that was just a comment. Big high fives all over.
Can I just say thank you for that? Thank you. And I will share, no, thank you.
Sir Councillor Kendrick, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to sort of add to that, if you like. When I first took over this portfolio in February, I was seeing data sheets, some of it historic granted, that showed some individual social workers at 40 cases, a lot at 34, 36. The goal was trying to get it down somewhere around about 22. Then it's dropped to 20. And here we are saying 15.9 on average. That has to be celebrated, and I'm really confident about the sort of controls and the oversight that's being put in to keep that on its proper trajectory.
Yeah, gosh, I'll join in that high five. I was just going to say, I take confidence in what I've read from Eleanor and from Viv as well, and what I've heard. I take confidence in the level of data that I see page after page, and for the lovely residents, and I say that with all respect, that talk about what do we use our council tax for. When we see the quality of data and time being put into making sure our children are safe, as we see here, I think we need to get that message out that we have some really, really robust processes now that look after our children. I did just want to pick up the point about social workers, and it's a comment really, and it's a hope, I suppose, really, to make sure that yes, sometimes social workers are putting that blanket around that child to get them through that storm. But sometimes that storm can be quite prolonged, can't it? And I just hope that, the partners they're working with, cases of domestic violence, domestic abuse, those who are working in the CAM system, I just really hope that those partners are resourced up enough to work with our social workers to really help make those changes in those children, because social workers can only do one part of the work in improving a child's life. It relies on those partners I just mentioned to make the real differences, and unless the partners are resourced up enough to work with our young people, then we might see figures dropping, but I really want to see some quality outcomes, not just on data form, but I want to see CAMS waiting lists go down. I want to see the number of incidents of domestic violence going down. I want to see the number of children being abused at home going down as well. The process are great. I just hope that our partners have got the right resources to deliver as well.
I think, as being said earlier, the challenge for partners is great, and I think as well as we're improving and making progress, one of the things I think that's really helpful is, because we've all got finite resources, but actually if we bring those resources together, because it's the diversity of skills. And I think what we've talked to our social workers about is very much about the relationship with the family. and helping families in adverse circumstances see the strengths within, whether that's the nuclear family, the extended family, and not seeing it as a weakness to sort of seek support. Because I think what happens often is that families don't seek support early enough because they feel they're going to be judged, and really we're wanting to move away from that and saying, you know, it's really right, it's okay to seek support, because if you get it early enough, it won't escalate into something that feels totally unmanageable. And I suppose our partners are our eyes and ears out in the communities for some of that where it has got more complex, but our duty and advice as well. So although our referrals have reduced, we have an high number of contacts, but what we do is we talk to partners and, you know, we share and we advise around approaches that might be taken, and again that's a learning opportunity, so we can share knowledge and expertise so that you're not always dependent on a CAMS worker, but you can have advice from a CAMS worker that enables you to apply something in your work with a family that sort of supports that child. And I think first and foremost, building resilience in children is really important, but then being really clear about when, you know, when that situation is not right for them, it's time that actually we need to take other action, but not necessarily take them away from the family as a whole. So our whole approach is family first and foremost, whether that's mum and dad, and uncle, grandparents, you know, people that they know really well. And it's about how we all work together and use the resource that we've got with the child at the centre.
Councillor Holmes, please.
Mine's more observational, really, as a councillor. I consider that the councillors are a partner as well, because what I'm finding now is I'm getting more and more contact from people wanting emotional support. I've always had that, but it's increasing, and also financial. And bear in mind, we haven't gone through a full rollout of universal credit yet. I'm already receiving very, very distressed cases. People who are in floods of tears on the phone and can't speak for the first 10 minutes, that kind of thing. And a lot of what I'm doing now is helping people sort out their personal budgets. And they're telling me they're contacting me, kind of what you've just said, that they can work me out first in advance. They can work out whether they trust me from things they're seeing me doing in community. So I'm like, you know, probably that soft comfort of knowing me and that first step. And I'm guessing that other councillors are having this as well. And we all know that the problems that come behind poverty for the whole family. And I know I could tell you a lot of cases, but there are some where it's led to very big problems simply because they've been struggling to pay the bills. So the other side of that is that when I go out and do work with them about budgeting, I find out a lot of families actually don't know how to budget, and they're making really unhelpful choices in how they're spending the money. A lot of it through cycles of how they were brought up, and also not really having the knowledge and the wherewithal to go out and find out better ways of doing things. So that's the bit that concerns me, that this is a problem that's kind of a black cloud that could start throwing down some big problems on us. You know, I have views on universal credit, as I'm sure everybody does. I am seeing big impacts of it that are very, very worrying at the moment. I've got several cases that are in that 5-week void, which is causing some massive distress. So I think part of our building that resilience, I'm really interested in how we are supporting families. I'm limited what I can do. I haven't got a magic wand, I haven't got a load of money either. So it's part of families being able to know where to go and what they can get, and there being something there.
It's really interesting because only last week I met with Jill Greenfield, who was leading on Communities Plus, and also Bridge Featherstone, who works at Huddersfield University. And Bridge has done a lot of work around poverty and the impact on families. And our meeting was very much about looking at our poverty strategy, looking at Communities Plus, and looking at services that sit in the community, and how we can be equipped so to support the families in a way that is of benefit to them, and it's actually giving them those opportunities to feel able to have that conversation with someone that's not necessarily so threatening, because actually opening up that conversation is a starting point to sort of dealing with some of the complexities rather than sort of letting that move forward. And that's the early days, but actually we're setting out a piece of work that we feel that we can actually look at in training the community to see how effective that is. And I'm happy to share that once it's developed. It's very early stages, but I think it's something that we really need to start working on quite quickly.
I mean, it may be something that we need to talk about more in council as well, as councillors jointly across the parties, because, you know, taking, and I know we keep saying I'm not talking about politics, I'm not, I'm genuinely not talking politically. You know, apart from that, we all agree on it, you know, and we're all councillors because we care, so I think we're kind of useful to a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and I think we need to maybe sort of step back and work out exactly what those ways are, and I think it's changing now. So yeah, I would welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dale.
On the improvement journey, under strengthening and embedding and adapting, the first bullet points are refresh improvement plan based on learning or based on learning and feedback. I'd like to know if there is an action plan which says when this will happen, how this will happen, and who will be responsible for leading it. Page 53, the improvement journey.
So it's because you're close. So is that it? Oh, I sound really loud now. Sorry. So apologies. It's because you're so close. So yeah, so the 10-point plan's behind. So that sets out the work that we're going to do, and then behind that, once this was signed off, we do the action plan that details the timescales for each area. So we'll prioritise and reprioritise. I have a monthly meeting that actually looks at the improvement plan, that looks at the progress of each area. There's leads for each area, so Steve leads on areas, Christine leads on areas, and the expectation is that they come back and so to talk about, as progress being made, what do we need to do next, and it's monitored very regularly, and then that actually feeds into the improvement board.
Any further questions, Dale? Okay. Councillor Donovan.
Sorry, this is just something really short. So, asking children to be more resilient, that doesn't wash with me. You know, a lot of the latest research, and there's a book that came out just this week as well, that talks about, you know, child development predominantly being about nature rather than nurture. So I don't think we should talk about children trying to be telling them or teaching them to be resilient. What I prefer us to do, and I'm sure we do this, just maybe we're a bit pedantic on the language really, is making sure that we talk therapy-wise and about helping them to cope better. Not to be more resilient, just to give them strategies to help them to cope better. They are inextricably linked a little bit, but the language is important for me, and helping a child to cope better allows them to become, by default, more resilient. But first of all, and I'm sure they're already doing this, I know they will be, but I thought I must say it, we must help children to be able to cope better, whether it's, you know, CBT or psychosocial, whatever type of therapy or whatever work's happening. I just much prefer coping rather than resilient, because I think it'll lead to resilience.
It's probably the way that I speak. I've probably been in my job too long. But it's the very things you're talking about, those coping strategies, and we wouldn't talk to children about resilience. It's what we talk about is, you know, working with them, what things do they do well, and building on that and helping them so to manage some of the things. So the things we've talked about, the worries, what is it that worries you, and how can we support you to manage that so you're less worried. And you're right, what that leads to is that increased resilience in the formal term. I wouldn't talk about therapy, because actually not everybody needs therapy, because that's more of a medical model. And actually, so therapy comes in at a point, but then individuals are not always ready to access therapy. So what do you do alongside that when they're not ready for that? And some of the work we do, for example, with our looked after children is what we call life story work. And so to working through how have they got to where they are. So helping them understand their identity, who their family are, whatever they think about the family, who they are, so that they have a full understanding of themselves and they understand where they fit, and it's that sense of identity, so they get strength from that, and that's really important.
Councillor Bellamy.
Thank you. I was really pleased to hear about the massive drop in agency staff, because everybody knows when I care a thing about staff morale as well, and I know my colleague there does as well. So that was good to hear, and I presume staff morale is a lot better than what it previously was, and I know I've heard that at improvement panel. And I was just the other thing I was just wondering about, I know Liquid Logic is now live, and I was just wondering if that's helped at all, and if it is working, it's helping to also improve the data that we are receiving as well, and is that helping at all with the improvement?
So Liquid Logic is live and kicking. Yes, we're in our early stages, and what happened, so from the changeover from Care First to Liquid Logic, we added 2 weeks where we didn't have an electronic system, and what we had is a base where we saved records, and they're being populated into Liquid Logic, so we're not at an ideal point as yet. We're getting there, because once those documents are in the system, then we will have all the accurate data. As with any electronic system, once you get it into practice, it's the finer tweaks to make sure it works to full effect, and then you can start on development. I think what social workers will say is that actually, in terms of their day-to-day work, it is a much easier system to work, so they can record things much quicker. We've reduced the numbers of, we've stripped it back almost, and the number of points where they could or needed to record. So already we're seeing improvements, but to get its full benefit, I think we've still got a bit of work to do.
Councillor Holmes and then Dan.
I just want to go back to what Councillor Donovan was talking about, and for me, my focus has always been, and I know it's other people's as well, for a child to cope and have resilience, or whatever else you want to describe it as, they need at least one person in their life they love, they trust, and they can go to. And that's the best thing we could ever give as a first step, any of our children. So they always have somebody to turn to that they feel safe with. You know, it could be a teacher, a parent, a guardian, an older sibling, a social worker, a counsellor, because I know I'm that for quite a few adults on my ward now. And they're not probably all as old as you might think they are as well, you know. Some of them are parents of young children. And again, it's a changing world out there. And again, we're one of your partners, because we're back to the fact that some families are now trusting us as their first step into either not needing help, or if they need it, going for it. So it was just, I just bring, I know I'm a bit of a nightmare for every meeting I go into. I like to focus on a person, and it is all about people. It's not about sitting reading reports. And I know I'm not alone on that, so I want to do more. So I think we need to find a way of how we're going to do that.
No, and I couldn't agree more, and I think you stole some of my words there, because actually the individual... No, it's all right. You're more than welcome. you have the privilege to do that. Actually, that individual, whoever they are. And I think this is why we talk about actually keeping children with their families, whether that's the nuclear or abroad or in their communities, is really key. Because what you'll know about children, they will have someone, and it can be the neighbour or someone in school, someone that's really important to them on a day, and the person that they trust and have that warmth for. And so I often talk about when we move children from their communities, you're taking more than the family away. You're sort of taking so many things away. And so I agree that, and I suppose for us as well is, now we have a stable workforce, it is the opportunities for our social workers to build that relationship, which they weren't doing previously. And children were reporting having multiple social workers and really becoming distrustful. And we are moving away from that. It is a really valid point.
Going back to liquid logic, do you think it's capable of improving information sharing and communications across the partnership?
Our next phase will be looking to see how partners have access to liquid logic. But we have to think about GDPR and what that means in terms of all the consent and the confidentiality and the sensitivity of information. So Joanne and myself have had an oral exercise since the implementation of liquid logic because one element is an early element, but the other part of it is a children's social care element, which is a statutory part of the service. So that for me is about only those that are having direct work with the families would have access to that, or other people in the service. So what we have to think about going forward in terms of what it can offer liquid logic, what would we have that we can share in the partnership so we can communicate much easier and share this information. And there were ways of doing that, but actually that will take some time to configure.
But it is under consideration, which is what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from panel members? No? Okay. First of all, thank you for coming and sharing the refreshed improvement plan with us, which shows, I think, real progress that has been made, and we've been able to see that on the journey as a panel, as a scrutiny panel, to be able to see that and to be able to question what has been done. And it is a slow journey, but it's a journey that is making progress as we go along. And I think I just want to acknowledge as well the commitment and contributions and determination of the staff and the team in improving the services. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 7. This is the Children's Disability Service update. The purpose of this report is to provide an overview of the work that has been undertaken in response to improving the quality of practice and the safeguarding of children and young people with additional needs, including those with a disability. Christine, is that right? You're taking?
Thank you. I've not been here before, so I'll give you... So my name's Christine Bennett. I'm the Head of Service for Assessment Intervention, but also have a lead as the Head of Service for the Children with Disability Services. So I think a lot of this report you'll have had the opportunity to read. I'll just probably give you the key highlights, summary, and then open it up for any questions that you might have. A lot of this leads on kind of the report that Elaine and update Elaine's given in terms of the improvement journey for children's services. Following what was clear when Leeds began the partnership, part of the improvement journey, the Children with Disabilities Services was fixed under the all age disabilities, and as part of that wasn't kind of linked into the 10-point improvement journey plan. So the first part of the review was to actually realign the children's element of the service, so the social workers and the workers who work within the early help offer to children with disabilities back under the directorship of Elaine McShane. We undertook that, and so on the 1st of May of this year, the Children with Disability Service moved back under that line of accountability. We still hold the principles of the all age disability in terms of ensuring that children who are in receipt of a service through a disability or having additional needs, one of the echoes was that families used to fall off a cliff edge at the moment of that young person returning to an adult, and certainly a lot of the feedback from the families was that you know, the transitioning from being a child into adulthood often left them feeling that they got a big resource within the children world, and that then weren't prepared of what that would look like in the adult world. So this report gives assurances to yourselves that those principles about how we work together and that families have a clear understanding of actually what that transition package looks moving forward still remains. The fundamental part of the children with services coming back under our leadership is that the social workers and the team managers that sit within those teams now are in receipt of the same level of training and the development that's been aligned to social workers who sat within the assessment and intervention and the looked after children's services. So they are all signed up to doing the recording, assessment and planning, strengthening practice training. The team managers now attend the team management meeting with all the other assessment intervention team managers. What that does is give them an overview of what we are trying to achieve as a holistic children's services, but also allows them to have the capacity to share knowledge and expertise. Some children who have additional needs primarily might not be open to the children with disability services because the primary reason why a social worker is involved is through child protection concerns, but within that family they may have a child with a disability or additional needs. So what this now allows for is social workers within assessment intervention to be able to share their knowledge and expertise with the social workers who sit working with families within a child in need setting of a disability, but likewise where a social worker may be working within a child protection and have not got an area of expertise and skills and knowledge of understanding the complexities that they might bring where a child has a disability, they can actually have easier access to a social worker who's got a level of expertise and knowledge in that area. So there's a lot more sharing and collaborating on that information, which will improve the confidence of the workforce, but actually more importantly improves the quality of services provided to children with a disability and additional need. What that has given us since beginning of July, all referrals now have one central access point, and that is into duty and advice. And a lot of work has been done with the social workers in the duty and advice that in taking the referrals for a family that may have a disability, that we're not purely looking at it from a safeguarding angle, that a family who have a child with a disability under the Children Act have an automatically right to have a social work assessment because they're all automatically deemed as a child in need. However, what we do recognise, and certainly with kind of conversations I've had with PCAN and the family forums, is that a lot with families with a child with a disability additional needs have a number of professionals involved, and quite often having another professional from a social work that comes with the stigma attached to social work is that I'm having to tell my story again and there's all these professionals that already understand it. What I would like is the access to the resource that in terms of from a parenting and a welfare actually makes my life and my child's life easier. And that's the next phase that we're trying to work with our partners to say, is there an easier route that actually through work with health who may be involved or the school, that actually you understand that family's needs best, and actually your assessment is something that we will take as a proof of kind of the need and unmet need, and we will allow you a smoother access to a resource that sits within the short breaks or the activities. For some families, though, they absolutely want a social worker to do that assessment, even though they may have, and I think sometimes that's been the confusion, that some families haven't known where to turn, and that whoever picked up the phone on that day, they often felt they'd been being persuaded not to have a social work assessment, and they wanted it, and the other families were being told, you've got to have a social work assessment, and they didn't want one. So that's what our journey has been, is actually to bring some clarity to the social workers, first of all, but about actually allowing them to understand when do we need to work with the family, when is it the family is saying we want that assessment from you, but actually when can we exit that back down into the early help services, And when do families have an absolute right just to be able to look at the assessments from other professionals and actually as a social worker look at that and says, we don't need to come out and reassess you because we can see what that need is and we can put that resource in without going through an unnecessary other professional coming out. What will happen with this review is, for what my vision is that the families will get a timely response, that they'll get a timely review of their care package, and from that they'll get an improved outcome for their young person. But also at those points of review, if there's been a significant change for that family, actually that can then come back for a social work assessment if that's needed, and we will look at changing that package accordingly. I've been in the service now for 5 months, and what's been interesting to me is some of the complaints that come across my door are quite often around the communication and a lack of understanding of actually what our world in the disability looks like. So we'll be moving forward, we're doing a lot of work with the Parent and Caring Forum to actually understand what are the frustrations of the family and how can we actually work with the families to make that pathway a lot smoother. I think finally what I would kind of say in terms of where we're at the review is that we are now working closely with the social workers in the teams to understand what does their caseload look like and actually what of those cases actually can move into the early support element of the world, which allows them to actually concentrate on the children who have either more vulnerable in terms of their complexity of needs or vulnerable through needing to have child protection kind of overview and insight. So it's similar to the work that we've done within the assessment intervention, is once you understand the nature of the caseloads that they're carrying and actually you can begin to free that up through the work that you're doing with your early support partners and other agencies, actually gives more clarity to the social worker and to the family of what our role is at that statutory element. The work has only just begun, so it is new for the social workers as it is new for the management, but now I've been a permanent member of staff there, I am visible. We have a permanent service manager who has got a lead on the children with disabilities, and we have a permanent set of team managers. I think it's probably the most stable workforce in terms of social work and provision, but actually what it hasn't had is the overview of that improvement journey and going along the changes. So that's kind of really what we're doing now, is it's actually making sure that they feel part of the improvement journey, not excluded. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions or comments from panel members? Dale.
On page 92, 3.1, you say our current actions are being met positively. Can you share some examples of this? .1, our current actions are being met positively. Can you share some examples of this?
So I'm now part of the SEND Strategy Board, which has got PCAN representatives on there, and I've met with them on a number of occasions in terms of what are the frustrations. I've now visited the parents' workshops that they do and had individual conversations with families. And a prime example of that was, without going into confidential, a lady was struggling in terms of accessing a resource and she didn't know where to go. From that conversation, I was able to be very clear, contact the duty and advice. The feedback I had from that lady was, actually it was the first time that she'd felt that actually children's social care had listened to her. So I think for me it's about our own visibility with the families, where I think before they've been making the phone call and it's often felt that they're having to jump through hoops. So I think the expression of just by that simple engagement and saying I'm here to listen, but then taking that listening to then turning up at an event with families says that I'm not just somebody. In the past, their feeling is that social care have done a tick box consultation, and that decisions have already been made, and then we just want to tick a box that says consultation. The promise I've given to the families is that's not how I work. It's not the restorative way that we're wanting to work with families. So therefore, we will look for true consultation. And the beginning of that is that they know who I am. So, as I said, it's very, very early days in prime example, but the feedback that I got from the parent care informer and after that was the families gave feedback that they actually felt that somebody would listen to, and from that, they actually knew where to go. I will know it's working well when I get reduced level of complaints coming in my level around poor communication, and that will be how I will measure it.
I'm nitpicking. I'm going to nitpick. I've also talked to members of PCAN, and the important thing for me is what you suggested is that your actions have been met positively. For me, I want our actions. Like, that is what is important to me, that it's our actions, all of your actions.
I think that's a fair point. And as I said, I think because of the improvement journey that Children's Service has been on, the concentration has been within the assessment and intervention and the child protection to almost the deficit of the children with disabilities. And I think part of that is because of the need to concentrate on the high level of caseloads and the turnover of staff. We now have a very clear line of sight as senior leaderships and with the social workers to say, actually, you feel you do a good job, and we don't want to take that away from you, but actually, is that the experience of the families? And I think it's only going to be through, you're right, of PCAN saying, we think you're listening, but Christine, we need to see a bit more proof in the pudding from you, really. And only true consultation and collaboration will become is by, as you make changes to the service, that we feel that we're involved with it. That's, I think, when I will know that we are truly working together and it's our service and our children's, rather than it being PCAN of just telling me as two people that actually everything's all right. It's actually what sits beneath PCAN, which is the children and families for me, that says things are working more collaboratively.
Thank you. Councillor O'Donovan.
I'll just go quickly, Chair. Yeah, I think it's hugely positive that we're joining up all these dots for these children and families with disabilities. I think it's just a comment, really, because I think if I asked you the question, it'd be too general. You might not. I don't mean this as a criticism. You might not know the answer to it, but my hope is that, particularly on that transition from child to adult services, that there is enough provision and appropriate provision for all the different needs out there. And I think particularly with the young people transitioning to adults that might want to move out of home, you know, again, it's a hope that there is that provision via partners, that they can do that in a supported manner that reduces the stress on that young person and reduces the stress on the family of that taking place, really.
I would like to offer reassurance that we are undertaking that work, and part of that work is understanding that these children aren't unknown to us, that we can understand from birth actually which children will need continuous care throughout their life into adulthood. I think for me it's about the smart of understanding that at an earlier point, sort of the 14, 15, 16, that we begin to have those conversations with family about what actually their young person as adult needs would look like, and actually bringing the adult world earlier into those conversations with family. And that's kind of our next phase, really, is actually, which comes under the old age disability. Say it's just because we've moved out of the old age disability structure, we haven't lost the principles. We need to ensure that actually, while they are children, that we're meeting our legal requirements to ensure that they are kind of seen and safeguarded and protected. But with this particular cohort, in terms of their child in need and their level of vulnerability and complexity throughout their life, that families have an early introduction into the adult world, and that might be actually moving out of their home into shared living or kind of independent. And certainly some of the conversation that we're having with our housing, they've been very clear. If we know from early stage which cohort, we then can plan around what that accommodation looks like and look at bespoke. So that is what we're, the kind of conversations that we're going to be having.
Councillor Bellamy.
Thank you. I think for me it is communications, and it's these families knowing who to contact, who, where, you know, and it's not I'm not getting that information, and I'm not being told that information as soon as they're sort of finding themselves in this situation. And I think it's getting that information out there and signposting it, whether it's given to doctors, it's given to health professionals, whoever, and I think that's what needs to be worked on quite a lot, because I think so many people all of a sudden, we receive, you know, as councillors, we receive phone calls and it's like, who do we ring? Because we have, there are people out there that have no idea, you know, where the phone number is and who to contact, and I think that's the information that really does need to get out there.
So over the next 6 months, we were working with PCAN and other families in terms of understanding our local offer and what that looks like in terms of from a children with disability, in terms of referral pathways. It's also working, as been identified before by Sheila and by Elaine, in terms of the role the community hubs plays, the early support, and how we all interconnect. For me, families should have a right to be able to access a resource within their local community, irrespective of an additional need or a disability. And that's the word that we need to, in terms of including families. So part of our role will be is understanding where the children are living and using our skilled expertise and knowledge base of our inclusion officers to start doing the work with the community hubs to say a child may be able to attend Scouts if there's just this additional resource, rather than a child not being able to attend Scouts and they've got to go to something else that's 40 miles away from the home that actually meets a disability. So there's some of the conversations that we're having with our community to make it more accessible to families within their own communities.
It's going to seem a strange question, but what do you call yourself? Or what do the teams call themselves when they're out in the communities? Because if they're calling themselves inclusion officers, it doesn't sound very welcoming to me, if you don't mind me saying.
So the inclusion officers are two people whose role was to ensure that when families are wanting to access childcare or for families to be able to go to work, that they'd got a list of kind of who those resources were that actually supported families with additional needs. What we're looking at is reviewing their role to actually not in terms of be the ones who are directly working with the families. They will be the family support workers, they will be the early support officers. The inclusions are working with partners around actually how they ensure that they're able to deliver a bespoke service to families that enables a child. So they're not working with the families, they're working with the local community hubs and the professionals to give them the skills to be able to enable a young person to extend that work route. So it's more around skilling up the workforce for a child to come in, rather than the families, the inclusion officer working with the family. Does that make sense?
Just, I do get some feedback from, not necessarily on this area, but generally you get feedback that people, the minute they hear officer, it does have a message there. And I think a lot of us in the council, I'm guilty of it. I'll go have a word with the officer, when actually that's probably not the, and I'm retraining myself at the moment to not do that, and I've been for some time, and it's taking a lot of effort, to be fair, because I'm so used to it. But the word officer does put a lot of people off, so that was the reason I asked.
And it's a job title rather than the work that they're doing. So I think, again, we can ensure that our workers are talking, and they're inclusion workers rather than officers.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from panel members? Okay. Just to add, I think it's really positive to see the meaningful consultation that is taking place with regard to the new arrangements that have been put in place, and also with the proposed considerations for improvements going forward as well. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad people have been able to question this report today, but as has been said, this is early days, and it isn't for me to tell this scrutiny panel what to scrutinise, but I would really welcome the challenge, the questions about so what outcomes have we achieved from this area of service in the future, if you would bear that in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for the report. Thank you. Okay, item 8 is the Children's Scrutiny Panel work programme. And this is to consider future meeting dates, and Yolandi will circulate this to all members for consideration. The next meeting will be on the 3rd of December at 10 o'clock. Thank you all for your attendance, contributions.